Hi, Bettina.
Hi, Marjorie.
I'm so excited that we're here today because every time Bettina and I have a conversation, I always leave inspired and excited about the future. So I hope this will have the same effect on you guys. So we both have been, over the last decade, part of the Web3 blockchain community in different capacities. And our industry has faced, over the last 18 months, quite a challenging time, primarily kind of like powered by, the press and some of the bad things that happen. In November of 2022, we also saw the collapse of FTX, which, brought massive losses to users and investors around the globe in Web3. And simultaneously that month, also OpenAI launched ChatGPT, kind of like moving the cultural and technological narrative in a different direction. I think the collapse of the market, of the trading crypto markets, but also the NFT market, kind of like make the whole community lose a bit of hope. And thinking, well, this is going to go away. But we both know technologies don't go away, and once they're there, it's unavoidable that they will continue to progress. And even though the last 18 months have been super challenging, there has also been some good sparks of progress. And I think, PayPal launching a stable coin and signalizing that these things are moving forward and the worlds of Web3 and the traditional economy are merging, some sparks of like that progress is coming. But Bettina, I know you are an incredible researcher and an investor, and I would love to know, how do you see the progress in Web3 right now after the last 18 months of madness?
Yeah, I'm personally very happy we called this Sparks of Progress, because I think what I was reflecting on is a maxim in Silicon Valley that gets tossed around the same as we talk about Moore's Law or Metcalfe's Law. One is called Amara's Law, which was coined by Roy Amara. He was a sort of futurist and early researcher on the ARPANET. And he says, we tend to overestimate the effect of a technology in the short term and then underestimate its effect in the long term. And I feel so strongly that that applies to Web3. In the short term, we early on, maybe now a decade ago in our world, had a lot of use cases and excitement about how this was going to be so transformational. And then people, this hype cycle kind of wanes and people get interested in other technologies, but they miss often and underestimate the core real standards and building blocks that are being created. And so I think some of what we wanted to share with you and talk about are, in the last decade, we have seen immense amount of progress in Web3. Everything from, core infrastructure, these networks, these new, essentially, blockchain computers emerging and competing, really, and above them, middleware and tooling for developers, and eventually the application layer. But the amount of time it takes to build those, the distributed architecture involved, the decision-making for how you design it, what the incentive mechanisms are, topics like proof of stake, which we'll get to with LUKSO, there's a lot of change in cryptography that we've seen emerge. And so these are really hard things to work with and design from the get-go. And so I think my hope is that people sort of take a longer view and zoom out and pay a little bit less attention to the news cycle that's around the trading markets and a little more attention to technologically how far we've come. So maybe you will give us a little enlightenment here about what's happened with LUKSO. I think your journey, Fabian and Marjorie have been in this space a long time, and Fabian, her business partner, pioneered a lot. ERC20, a lot of MIST, a lot of the core pieces that we use in Web3 every day while he was at the Ethereum Foundation, and certainly is a major technological player in this space. And so, LUKSO has been had its own journey, and I think that would be a really important story for people to hear.
Yeah, and it has been a long story, and I think it took us 7 years since the moment we first drafted our white paper to the moment we launched. It was almost 7 years. And at the beginning, you know, Fabian and I, we met when we were both studying design here in Germany. So even though Fabian is a developer, we share a passion for design, and we were very deep in Web3, and we saw the potential and the change that we will be transforming kind of like industries at large. But our specific industry of interest was the creator economy. And that's what we decided, let's sit down together and put these ideas on paper. And we drafted the LUKSO white paper, and we titled it Blueprint for a New Creator Economy. And back then, we thought, okay, we need to do a few things. We need to make sure we have a network where the community can develop all of these creative and related use cases, and then we need a set of standards on top of it. And basically, standards is the way you can agree with people you don't know on chain, if we can put it in a simple way. And then we kind of like came up with a list, and we know, okay, this is what we need to do. We thought, okay, this might take us around 2 years. And 7 years later, we were about to make it to the finishing line, which turns out is just the starting line all over again. And I think that naivety behind it, like realizing that it took much longer than we anticipated, is also based on the fact that, you know, the way traditional development works in Web 2, it doesn't apply for Web 3. The rules are quite different, so that part of standardization is super important. So in the center of our work focused on the standardization of like the user identity and how users create a profile on chain. And when we mean identity, we mean that soft identity, right? Not the state issue identity, but that identity which we present ourselves online and in virtual worlds. And also how creators of any category can issue products on chain, and how we can make sure those products are interoperable within different applications. So that we thought we could do in 2 years. We were wrong. But we're there, and then we have seen a lot of progress now since we launched last year, and it was a major milestone. And
I mean, even Universal Profile only launched, you know, how many, 12 weeks ago?
12 weeks ago.
Yeah, so I mean, that's sort of the perspective I think people need to keep in mind is, you know, how long it takes to build a network correctly and design it so that it will last and be able to, you know, you launched with proof of stake already.
100%.
And so, you know, having the network launch just last year and having universal profiles, maybe you can talk a little bit, well, I'll say, I think the point about standards is a really important one. And we actually see that in a broader context when we look at sort of human history, right?
100%.
I think, you know, if we even take very far examples, the idea of, you know, the mechanical clock, right? Being able to have transportable time across the population is what enabled us to have everything on top of it, from railroad systems that are, you know, timely to, you know, the division of labor into a workday. All of these cultural changes came from a very core standard around how we share reality, right? Just being synced on time. I think, you know, we've seen obviously similar sort of levels of standard emerge when the internet first came about, TCP/IP. You know, there were other protocols that were vying at the time to be the network architecture of our communications globally. OSI was one that was kind of actually favored. But TCP was the underdog and it won. And from there, we got, you know, this explosion of creative activity in commerce, in, you know, everything that we see here at this conference in our digital lives. So I think, you know, there is something very important about standards that shape a shared reality. And for Web3, you know, topics like universal profile or even just, you know, token standards that have emerged are really those building blocks that enable composability on top and these much faster innovation cycles, because developers, creators don't have to build everything underneath the technology stack of the service or product they want to offer. They're just building the part that, you know, is value added and is new or exciting. And so I think, you know, this model of having a digital architecture, a shared computational network is very new. And then part of what's new about it is that we'll see, you know, these amazing, creative kinds of economies emerge on top that are not just one thing. There are 100%. Sort of many.
I always love your point of view in terms of standards, because you see it from such a global perspective and human perspective, as in terms of how we have evolved and how those, in the moment, seeming small decisions have such a large repercussion in the future. For us at LUKSO, we see standards not from such a global perspective, but we're always looking from the vantage point of the creator economy. And I think, with the launch of Universal Profile, and for those who don't know, the Universal Profile is our suggestion or our version of your on-chain identity. And when we first started, we realized one of the biggest pain points that we had in Web3 is the way users onboard themselves. And traditional wallets are not really human readable. We are not meant to read long strings of letters and numbers. So we understood, okay, we need a profile. We need something that people can read and kind of connect with. And that profile truly needed to look in a way, kind of like what we already know from Web2, kind of like your social media profile. But in that process, we needed to define an array of core components that needed to be standardized in advance in order to ensure that people could actually build this profile and create products and interact with each other, with that mentality and that in the future of okay, we're going to exist in an economy in which we're going to constantly be trading digital assets and phygital assets and all of that stuff. So we were not necessarily solving a problem that existed yet, but we were anticipating a problem that might come in the very near future. And that was the part that I think we underestimated how long was going to take, but now it's there. And the exciting thing is, the moment we launch, within weeks after, a series of startups independent from us launched using the Universal Profile. And that was only possible because everything we do is open source. The other startups could see our GitHub repositories and understanding which state of development we find ourselves. And then the moment we were ready, they were ready. And I think this will be something that will be very, very difficult to orchestrate in a Web2 architecture. And in Web3, all of these things become really possible. And even if you don't like people or you don't know people, you have the ability to collaborate with them. And I think this is the power that standards bring to us. But I think in the time that we find ourselves, Bettina, it will be very difficult to have this conversation and don't address the subject of AI, given the fact that we all collectively went into a frenzy between, making pictures in DALL-E or challenging the AI until we bring them into hallucination. And there's a lot of ethical concerns that come with it. People are worried. And I think a lot of the concerns around AI could potentially be answered with the principles of Web3 and blockchain technology. And I know a very long time ago, you gave a speech when you spoke about blockchain and AI, and it's around 5, 6, 7 years ago. And I know you've been thinking about it for a very long time, and I would love to hear, how do you see that? Do you think these two technologies that tend to scare the bejesus out of a lot of people, once they come together, we will be a bit more reassured? Is there a solution?
Yeah, I think, we obviously have heard a lot about AI at this event and in day-to-day culture now. I really loved, there was a piece that came out from Henry Kissinger, Eric Schmidt, and Daniel Huttenlocher at MIT, who had co-authored the book Age of AI. And they came out maybe February of last year, right after ChatGPT had launched. It was a WSJ op-ed. And they addressed this idea that, in human history, let's take the Enlightenment. We had this massive leap forward in the ability to develop new ideas, right? Big new ideas. But we also, alongside it, actually had a verification process in the scientific method. And so these two things, have kind of guided our human intelligence and progress along the way. And now we have this new, form of knowledge creation and synthesis at a very, very, very large scale when we talk about AI. And their point was, we actually don't have something to verify. We don't have something that bridges the gap between new knowledge creation and actually human understanding, right? It would take us so much time we wouldn't be able to compute the results or the same analysis as AI, and that's why we use technology, right? So I like this point because to me it opened up the door to say, yeah, that is actually a role where you can see Web3 playing, right, in the verification process. And actually, if you zoom out, some of the fears that we talk about in AI and that are pretty palpable around, how much do we know about what it's doing, or how can we verify, what are the audit trails, what happens when a few companies who are centralized control really most, if not all, of the models and the data, and therefore the results. I think those are questions that actually a lot of the concerns relate to the ethos that's embedded in Web3 already. So decentralization is paramount for our world. Thinking about audit and verification and being able to prove that through code is fundamental, and it's automated. I think there's something interesting about decentralized compute. Not a lot of people talk about that. There's sort of an area of Web3 development called decentralized physical infrastructure, DPIL, which is DPIN, which is not such a nice phrase, but you can imagine like latent decentralized computing power being actually used to do different activities in AI, whether it's labeling or training or just using the compute. And I think there's a lot of services that we'll see. But the core part that I think you and I look at a lot is, okay, these topics that are concerning, they're rooted in specific fears that are alleviated by the actual construct of Web3. And so I do think that's an area for collaboration. And it's not to say that these things are just going to merge and it's a panacea. Nobody would say that. And we've certainly seen from the venture side a lot of startups that just slapped AI into their Web3 pitch and tried to say, oh, this is the future. And that's not really what I'm arguing. But I think the core concerns do meet the core ethos of Web3 and maybe bridge the gap of human understanding.
100%. I think what these both industries share in common is that they really clearly they're digital technologies, but they don't follow under the typical rules of digitalization. We're not digitizing an existing process. It's like transforming, it's really transformative. So I think that part is where I think a lot of friction and tension is creating a lot of misunderstanding, but I do agree that there is a big potential in that merge. In the work that we do, I have a second startup called the Dematerialize, and we deal with a lot of designers and creators. We live in the digital world, so we create primarily digital assets and digital fashion goods, and we created garments for the Met Gala, so that's like the other hat I wear. A lot of the creators,
look at them, they're lovely.
Thank you. And a lot of the creators, they were very scared, and the brands were really concerned. Like, what does it mean for us? And I think that unrest is very understandable. But we always tell them, like, don't worry, everything that we're created, we're registering on chain. It's timestamp. You can prove it. It has been done by us and by you. And I think there's also amazing synergies in terms of like accelerating the creative output in terms of using the AI tools. So that's undeniable, amazing prospect in the future. So I'm very excited about that. But I think we could move on quickly. We are at 0 now, but there's one thing that I heard you say years ago. You quoted John Scully, and you said technology has to be either beautiful or invisible. And since then, like, legitimately, I embrace that as my leitmotif in terms of everything that we do in both of my projects. That kind of like informs every decision that we make. And I think it's at the end, technology needs to kind of like answer to that human desire of ease and beauty and appreciation, and et cetera. So I wonder, from your perspective, you see a lot of projects, you're an investor, you receive a lot of pitch decks, and also you conduct your own research. Like, how far do you think we are from, in terms of Web3, from achieving that invisibility and beauty? I know at LUKSO, that's kind of like informs everything that we do, and that's, we hope in the future we will have users and creators building applications, and they don't necessarily need to use the Web world Web3 or the world NFT is just products, and we just have profiles and we use them and that's it. And I think the moment we stop using those terms, it means that they have become adopted, but that still potentially doesn't mean that they are beautiful or well, maybe invisible.
I leave the beautiful part to you, and you should really look at the work Marjorie does, because it's pretty incredible, I think, helping people understand what's possible. But yeah, to me, actually, the Bitcoin ETF, usually the trading side is less interesting to me, but I think it's an important signal in some ways that, we're not going to live in these parallel universes anymore of you get Web3 and you're into crypto, or you're, TradeFi and you're normal, you work in the normal Web2 day to day. I think, it does mean we're bridging this gap into, digital assets are going to be part of normal everyday finance, and that brings a lot of the other parts of Web3 with it. So my hope is that it's not too far that we actually see not having these super parallel universes, but actually one set of experiences and tools that we're using, and all the economies that you're building out with LUKSO built on top. So I think that's not too far away, but the beautiful part is up to you. Okay, so you're going to have invisible, hopefully, beautiful, definitely, if Marjorie's working on it.
Deal. Okay, so there is some sparks of progress. I feel very optimistic.
We hope you believe that too, because we certainly do. 100%. We wouldn't stay in our industry another 10 years if it wasn't because of it.
But. So I think we should all embrace the ethos of DLD and dare to know more about Web3.
For sure.
Amazing.
Thanks, Marjorie.
Thank you, Bettina.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.